They say a mother's love is unconditional, but I learned that a daughter's patience can have a very definite limit. My own daughter, Clara, the child I poured my life into, looked me in the eye and told me, "You're just a burden now." Those words were meant to break me. And they did, for a while. But then, they became the fuel for a decision that changed everything. This is the story of how I sold the house she thought was her birthright and found my own slice of heaven by the sea. It's funny how life can turn on a dime, or in my case, on a single, carelessly cruel sentence. For 68 years, I'd considered myself a strong woman, a good mother, a loyal wife. Arthur, my late husband, always said I was the bedrock of our family. We built our lives in that 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street, every brick seemingly mortared with memories. It was where Clara took her first steps, where she'd hidden from thunderstorms under my quilt, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays and Christmases. After Arthur passed 2 years ago, the house felt too large, too quiet, but it was still home. It was the repository of my life, of our life together. I'd always imagined Clara and her husband, Mark, bringing their own children there one day, filling its rooms with laughter again. I'd pictured myself as the doting grandmother, baking cookies in the kitchen Arthur had remodeled for me just before he got sick. That was the dream, wasn't it? The one we're sold. But dreams have a way of souring when reality sets in. Clara had always been focused, driven. I'd admired that in her, even when it meant she had less time for me, especially after Arthur was gone. I'd poured everything into her, my time, my savings for her education, even a significant portion of what Arthur left me to help with the down payment on her own stylish, minimalist townhouse across town. I never begrudged her any of it. What mother does? You give, and the joy is supposed to be in the giving, in seeing your child thrive. And thrive she did, at least materially. She was a successful marketing executive, Mark a financial analyst. They had the life, the cars, the vacations. I was proud, truly. But a creeping chill had started to enter our interactions over the last year. My calls sometimes went unanswered for days. My invitations for dinner often met with last-minute cancellations. When she did visit, her eyes would scan the old house, not with nostalgia, but with something I couldn't quite name then, a sort of critical assessment. "Mom, this wallpaper is so dated," she'd say, or, "You really should get rid of some of this clutter." I'd laugh it off, explaining that each piece of clutter held a memory. I didn't see it as clutter. I saw it as the tapestry of my existence. I suppose my own needs became more apparent after Arthur's passing. I wasn't as spry as I used to be. The garden, my pride and joy, became harder to manage. Sometimes, yes, I'd ask Clara for help, a lift to a doctor's appointment, assistance with a particularly heavy task. I tried not to be a nuisance, always prefacing my requests with apologies. It was during these times that the impatience first began to show, a tightening around her mouth, a curtness in her tone. Mark was even less subtle, often sighing dramatically if I took too long to get into the car or if I recounted an anecdote he'd heard before. I told myself it was stress, that their lives were busy. I made excuses for them, as mothers often do. I didn't want to believe that my only child, the center of my world for so long, was beginning to see me not as her mother, but as an obligation. The house, though, was my sanctuary. Within its walls, I could still feel Arthur's presence, hear the echoes of laughter. It was paid for, my security. I intended to live out my days there, surrounded by the love and memories it held. Little did I know, its sturdy bricks and familiar rooms would become the very battleground for my dignity. The little hints, the subtle shifts in Clara's demeanor, started to accumulate, like dust motes in a sunbeam, individually insignificant, but collectively casting a pall over my days. I remember one Saturday, I'd baked Arthur's favorite apple pie, the scent filling the kitchen just as it used to. I called Clara, hoping she and Mark might pop over for a slice, a little taste of normalcy, of family. "Oh, Mom," she'd said, her voice distant, distracted. "We're swamped today. Mark's got golf, and I have that charity gala thing to prep for. Maybe some other time." I could hear the clatter of a keyboard in the background.
Some other time.
It was becoming her standard refrain. The pie sat on the counter, a slowly cooling monument to my loneliness. I ended up giving most of it to Mrs. Henderson next door, who at least seemed genuinely appreciative. Then there was the issue of my cataract surgery. My vision had been getting progressively worse, and Dr. Evans said it was time. I wasn't afraid of the surgery itself, but the thought of navigating the post-op period alone was daunting. You can't drive for a bit and your eyes are sensitive. I'd tentatively asked Clara if she could perhaps stay with me for a couple of days, or at least help with errands. She'd made a non-committal noise. Let me see what my schedule looks like, Mom. It's a really busy quarter. In the end, it was my old friend, Sarah, who lived 2 towns over, who took a week off from her part-time job at the library to come and stay with me. Sarah, bless her heart, fussed over me, made me tea, read to me when my eyes were tired, and listened patiently as I voiced my growing anxieties about Clara. "She's just busy, Agnes," Sarah would say, though I saw the doubt in her eyes. Young people today, they have so much pressure, but I knew it was more than that. It was a distancing, a deliberate uncoupling. Mark was even more transparent. One afternoon, while Clara was in the bathroom, he'd wandered into the living room where I was, post-surgery, resting with my eyes closed. He probably thought I was asleep. I heard him mutter to himself, clearly annoyed by something on his phone. Then he sighed heavily and said, just loud enough for me to hear if I was pretending, "This whole situation is just a lot." My eyes snapped open, but he'd already turned and walked out. A lot? Was my existence a lot? Was needing a little help after surgery an unbearable imposition? The word stung, lodging like tiny shards of glass in my heart. I didn't mention it to Clara. What was the point? It would only lead to an argument, to her defending Mark, to me feeling even smaller, more insignificant. I tried to make myself smaller, to ask for less. I hired a local teenager to help with the garden, paid for a taxi service for my appointments. I didn't want to be a burden. That word, burden, hadn't been spoken aloud to my face yet, but I was beginning to feel it, to internalize it. The house, my beautiful, memory-filled house, started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. I was rattling around in it, a relic of a bygone era, while my daughter's life, vibrant and modern, sped on without me. The loneliness was a heavy cloak, and with each passing week, it seemed to grow heavier, more suffocating. I found myself talking to Arthur's photograph more often, asking him what I should do, how I should bridge this widening chasm between myself and our daughter. His smiling face offered no answers, only a reminder of a time when I had felt cherished, essential. The day it happened, the day the unspoken became brutally spoken, started like any other late autumn Tuesday. The sky was a flat, uninteresting gray, and a chill wind rattled the last of the stubborn leaves from the old oak in the front yard. I'd woken up with a dull ache in my hip, a common companion these days, and the thought of going out for groceries felt particularly daunting. The online delivery services were still a bit of a mystery to me, and besides, I missed the small human interaction of the local market. I decided to call Clara. Perhaps, just perhaps, she might be heading to the supermarket herself after work, or could pick up a few essentials for me. I rehearsed my request in my head, trying to make it sound as casual, as unimportant as possible. "Oh, darling, it's Mom. I was just wondering, if you happen to be passing by Henderson's Market later, could you possibly grab me a carton of milk and some bread? My hip is playing up a bit today, that's what I planned to say." When she answered, her voice was clipped, impatient. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a conference call. What is it?" The line crackled with background noise, voices discussing targets and strategies. "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear," I stammered, flustered. "I didn't realize." "It's nothing urgent, just what, Mom?" She cut in, the edge in her voice sharper now. "I really don't have time for this," and then something in me, perhaps a lifetime of suppressed needs, of always putting myself last, just surfaced. "It's just that sometimes, Clara," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "it would be nice if you had a little time for your mother." "I don't ask for much." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end. Then, her voice, cold and devoid of any warmth, any of the affection I remembered from her childhood, sliced through the phone line. Honestly, Mom, you don't ask for much? You're always asking for something. A ride here, help with that, emotional support for this. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? Mark and I are trying to build our lives, our careers. We can't just drop everything because your hip hurts or you're feeling lonely. Each word was a tiny hammer blow. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Clara, you just what? She snapped, her voice rising. You just expect me to put my life on hold for you? I have my own responsibilities. You have your house, your pension. You're supposed to be independent. Instead, she paused, and I could hear her take a ragged breath, as if bracing herself. And then came the words that would echo in my mind for months. Instead, you're just a burden now. A constant, whining burden, a burden. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and final. I couldn't speak. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hand clutching the receiver so tightly my knuckles were white. A burden. My own child. The silence stretched, filled only by the tinny sound of her breathing. Then, as if realizing she'd gone too far, or perhaps not caring, she said, "Look, I have to go. We'll talk later," and she hung up. I stood there, the dead phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone a mocking buzz. A burden. It was as if the floor had dropped out from beneath me. The kitchen, usually so warm and inviting, felt suddenly cold, alien. I sank onto one of the wooden chairs at the table, the one Arthur used to sit in, and the tears finally came. Not gentle, weeping tears, but harsh, racking sobs that tore through me, leaving me gasping for air. All the sacrifices, all the love, all the years of devotion had culminated in this. In being a burden. The word was a brand, seared onto my soul. The groceries were forgotten. The pain in my hip was nothing compared to the agony in my heart. That day, something inside me broke. But as I would later discover, sometimes things need to break to be rebuilt, stronger, and in a completely different shape. The days that followed Clara's devastating pronouncement were a blur of shock and profound, hollow grief. I moved through the rooms of my house like a ghost, the echo of her words, "You're just a burden now," following me, whispering from every corner, bouncing off the familiar walls that had once offered comfort. Now, they seemed to close in on me, mocking me with memories of a happier past, a past where I believed I was loved, valued, essential. I replayed our conversation countless times, her voice, sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the giggling, adoring child I remembered. Where had that child gone? When had she been replaced by this hard, resentful stranger? Sleep offered little respite. I'd drift off, exhausted from crying, only to jolt awake in the dead of night, her accusation ringing in my ears. I'd lie there, staring into the darkness, the weight of it all pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. During the day, I'd find myself staring at photographs, Clara as a baby, chubby and smiling in my arms, Clara on her first day of school, a gap-toothed grin and oversized backpack, Clara at her graduation, bright-eyed and full of promise. Had I done something wrong? Had I loved her too much or not enough? Had my sacrifices inadvertently created this entitled, callous creature? The questions tormented me. I tried to reason with myself. She was stressed. She didn't mean it. People say things in anger. But deep down I knew. Those words weren't just a slip of the tongue. They were a reflection of a deeply held resentment, a truth she had finally, brutally, allowed to surface. Mark, her husband, had likely fanned those flames. I remembered his sighs, his subtle eye rolls, his comment about me being a lot. They were a united front, it seemed, in their assessment of my worth, or lack thereof. The house, my beloved home, started to feel like a mausoleum. The scent of Arthur's pipe tobacco, which I sometimes thought I could still faintly detect in his study, no longer brought comfort, only a sharper sense of loss. He would have been horrified. He would have known what to do, what to say. But he was gone, and I was alone with this new, unbearable knowledge. I avoided Clara. I didn't answer her calls, which came a few days later, probably perfunctory attempts to smooth things over without actually apologizing. I couldn't bring myself to hear her voice. What could she possibly say that would erase those words? They were etched into my very being. A week after the call, something shifted. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of tea I hadn't touched, when a flicker of anger, hot and clean, pierced through the fog of my sorrow. A burden? Was that all I was to her after everything? After the sleepless nights when she was a colicky baby? After nursing her through measles and chickenpox? After cheering the loudest at her school plays and soccer games? After scrimping and saving to ensure she had the best education, the best opportunities? After using Arthur's life insurance, money meant for my own security, to help her and Mark buy their first home, a home they now deemed far superior to my dated one? The memories, once painful reminders of lost affection, now fueled a different emotion: indignation. I had poured my lifeblood into that child, into that family. I had given, and my reward was to be dismissed as a burden.
No.
I straightened my shoulders. The tears had stopped. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. She thought I was finished, a used-up old woman to be managed and tolerated until I conveniently disappeared. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated my strength, my resilience, the quiet fire that had always burned within me, the fire Arthur had loved and respected. He always said, "Aggie, you're soft on the outside, but you've got a spine of steel." It was time to find that steel again. I would not be a burden. I would not be a victim. And I certainly wouldn't spend my remaining years rattling around in a house where I felt like an unwelcome ghost. Clara had drawn a line in the sand. And in doing so, she had, ironically, given me a strange, unexpected gift: the permission to stop trying, to stop pleasing, and to finally, for the first time in a very long time, think about what I wanted. The decision didn't come like a lightning bolt. It was more like a slow sunrise, gradually illuminating a path I hadn't dared to consider before. For days, the anger simmered, a low burn beneath the surface. It wasn't a destructive, raging fire, but a focused, clarifying heat. It burned away the last vestiges of my self-pity and revealed a core of determination I had almost forgotten I possessed. One afternoon, while aimlessly flipping through a magazine, an advertisement caught my eye: a small, sun-drenched cottage nestled by the ocean with the headline, "Your new beginning awaits." The image was idyllic: blue skies, sparkling water, a charming little porch. It was so far removed from my current reality, from the oppressive grayness that had settled over my life in Maple Street, that it felt like a fantasy. But the phrase "new beginning" snagged in my mind.
Could I?
Did I dare? The thought was terrifying. Selling the house, our house, the only home I'd known for over 40 years, felt like a monumental betrayal of Arthur's memory, of our shared life. And yet, hadn't Clara's words already betrayed everything? She had redefined my role in the family, in my own home. I was no longer the cherished matriarch, but a liability. The house, she clearly felt, was her eventual inheritance, a property to be acquired, perhaps sold for a tidy profit, once the burden of its current occupant was removed. The more I thought about it, the more the idea took root. Why should I stay here, feeling like an intruder in my own life, waiting for my daughter to decide my fate? The house was mine, legally and morally. Arthur had made sure of that. It was my only significant asset, my security. And if I was a burden, then perhaps removing myself and my assets from Clara's orbit was the best solution for everyone. Especially for me. I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't judge, who would understand. My first thought was Sarah. I called her, my voice still a little shaky, and asked if she could come over. When she arrived the next day, her kind, familiar face was a balm to my frayed nerves. I poured out the whole story, the hurtful words, the growing unease, the chilling realization of Clara's true feelings. Sarah listened patiently, her expression shifting from sympathy to quiet indignation on my behalf. "Oh, Agnes," she said, taking my hand when I finally finished, my voice hoarse. That's just cruel. Unforgivable, really. She called me a burden, Sarah. I whispered, the words still tasting like ash in my mouth. After everything, she doesn't deserve you, Agnes, Sarah said firmly. And she certainly doesn't deserve that house, not if she's going to treat you like that. And then, tentatively, I broached the idea. I'm thinking of selling it, Sarah. Selling the house and moving away. Maybe to the coast. Starting over, Sarah's eyes widened, then a slow smile spread across her face. Agnes, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. A bit drastic, maybe, but why not? It's your life, your house. Why shouldn't you live it where you want, how you want, without feeling like you're walking on eggshells around your own daughter? Her enthusiastic support was like a burst of sunshine. Suddenly, the idea felt less like a wild fantasy and more like a viable plan. But it's so much to organize, I said, the practicalities dawning on me. The sale, finding a new place, the legalities. One step at a time, Sarah said calmly. And you won't be alone. I'll help you. And the first thing you need is a good lawyer, someone who'll look out for your interests. She paused, thinking. I know just the person. My niece used her a few years ago for a complicated property settlement. Said she was a shark, but a wonderfully empathetic one. Monica Carmichael. Let me get you her number. Monica Carmichael. The name sounded strong, capable. As Sarah jotted down the contact details, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced in a long time, a cautious, tentative hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this suffocating darkness. Maybe my new beginning was indeed awaiting. The appointment with Monica Carmichael was set for the following week. Sarah offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I needed to do on my own. It was the first step in reclaiming my independence, my agency. Monica's office was in a sleek, modern building downtown, a far cry from the cozy familiarity of Maple Street. I felt a little intimidated walking in, clutching my handbag containing the house deeds and a list of questions I'd meticulously prepared. But Monica herself was surprisingly warm. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor. She listened intently as I laid out my situation, starting with Arthur's passing, Clara's increasing distance, and culminating in the brutal phone call. I didn't embellish or dramatize. I just told her the facts, my voice quiet but steady. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Mrs. Davison, she said, her voice gentle but firm. First, let me say I am so sorry you're going through this. No parent deserves to be treated that way. What your daughter said was unconscionable. Her validation was immensely comforting. It wasn't just me being overly sensitive, it was genuinely awful. Now, she continued, shifting into a more professional tone, regarding the house. It's solely in your name, correct? Notwithstanding mortgage. Yes, Arthur made sure of that. He always said it was my nest egg, my security. Good man, Monica nodded. Then you are perfectly within your rights to sell it, to do whatever you wish with the proceeds, and to live wherever your heart desires. Your daughter has no legal claim to it whatsoever while you are alive. Regardless of what she might think or expect, this was a crucial point. Clara had always acted as if the house was a foregone conclusion, her inheritance simply waiting in the wings. The thought that I could just sell it, without her permission, without her even knowing until it was done, was both terrifying and exhilarating. We spent the next hour discussing the process, getting the house valued, finding a reputable realtor, the legal paperwork involved in a sale, and, importantly, protecting my assets once the sale went through. Monica was thorough, explaining everything in clear, simple terms, patiently answering my myriad questions. She also suggested drawing up a new will, one that reflected my current circumstances and wishes. It's always wise to have these things in order, Mrs. Davison, she said gently. Especially when family dynamics shift. I knew what she meant. My old will had named Clara as the primary beneficiary. That would need to change. Not out of spite, not entirely, but out of a newfound sense of self-preservation and a desire to direct my legacy towards those who genuinely valued me, or perhaps to causes I cared about. As I left Monica's office, Armed with a clear plan of action and a list of recommended realtors, I felt lighter than I had in years. The knot of anxiety in my stomach had loosened, replaced by a sense of purpose. The path ahead was still daunting, but it was my path, chosen by me for me. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in ages. I poured myself a small glass of Arthur's favorite sherry, sat in his armchair, and opened my laptop. Instead of looking at old photographs or rereading Clara's infrequent emails, I typed coastal properties for sale into the search bar. Page after page of charming cottages, seaside apartments, and houses with ocean views filled the screen. I scrolled, mesmerized. Some were too grand, others too remote. But then I saw it, a small, weathered-looking cottage, painted a cheerful yellow, with a white picket fence and a porch that looked directly out onto a sandy beach. It was in a little town called Seabreeze, a few hours down the coast. The description mentioned a small garden, 2 bedrooms, and stunning, uninterrupted ocean views. My heart gave a little flutter. It looked perfect, manageable, peaceful, beautiful. I saved the listing, a small smile playing on my lips. Clara, meanwhile, remained oblivious. She'd left a few voicemails, her tone shifting from mildly annoyed to slightly concerned, then back to impatient. "Mom, are you seriously giving me the silent treatment? This is childish. Call me childish?" After what she'd said, the irony was almost laughable. I didn't call back. Let her wonder. Let her think I was moping, defeated. She had no idea that her burden was quietly, meticulously, planning her great escape. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of secret activity. I felt like a spy in my own life, navigating a clandestine operation right under Clara's unsuspecting nose. My first step after meeting Monica was to contact one of the realtors she'd recommended, a brisk, efficient woman named Susan. Susan came to the house, and I steeled myself for her assessment. I knew Clara considered it dated, but Susan, to my relief, saw its potential. "Good bones," she declared, walking through the rooms. "Classic layout. A little updating in the kitchen and bathrooms wouldn't go amiss for a top-dollar sale, but it's a desirable neighborhood. It'll sell." We agreed on a strategy. A quiet listing initially, targeting serious buyers, to avoid a "for sale" sign planted brazenly on the lawn until absolutely necessary. I didn't want Clara or Mark driving by and seeing it prematurely. That confrontation would come, I knew, but I wanted it to be on my terms, when I was ready. While Susan handled the initial preparations for the sale, I threw myself into the more personal and often painful task of sorting through a lifetime of possessions. 40 years of accumulated memories, joys, and sorrows were packed into every closet, every drawer, every dusty box in the attic. Each item I picked up seemed to whisper a story. Clara's tiny, bronzed baby shoes. Arthur's collection of old jazz records. Wedding albums, school reports, holiday souvenirs. Deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to discard, was an emotional archaeology dig. Some things were easy. The hideous orange shag carpet samples Arthur had briefly considered for the den in the 70s? Definitely discard. My wedding dress, carefully preserved in a box. Keep, of course, though I wasn't sure where I'd store it in a small beach cottage. The hardest part was anything connected to Clara. Her childhood drawings, her first clumsy pottery creations, the ridiculous oversized teddy bear she couldn't sleep without until she was 10. For a moment, looking at these relics of a sweeter past, my resolve wavered. Was I being too harsh? Too unforgiving? Then I'd hear her voice in my memory. "You're just a burden now," and the steel would return to my spine. I packed a few essential mementos of her childhood, things that genuinely mattered to me, into a box labeled sentimental. The rest, the bulk of it, I set aside. Perhaps she'd want it one day, perhaps not. It was no longer my responsibility to curate her past. During this time, I made a secret trip down to Seabreeze. I told Sarah I was going for a drive, but she knew. She just smiled and wished me well. The little yellow cottage was even more charming in person. The agent, a friendly local man named Tom, showed me around. It was small, yes, but bright and airy, with large windows that framed the endless expanse of the ocean. The scent of salt and sea was intoxicating. As I stood on the porch, feeling the gentle sea breeze on my face and listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves, a profound sense of peace washed over me. This could be my place. This could be where I healed. I put in an offer, contingent on the sale of my Maple Street house. Tom was optimistic. Back home, the viewings began. Susan was discreet, scheduling them for times when Clara was unlikely to visit, which, thankfully, was most of the time. It was strange, watching strangers walk through my home, assessing its worth, imagining their lives within its walls. Each viewing was a small step closer to my departure, a small severing of ties. Clara did call, more frequently now, her tone increasingly bewildered and annoyed by my continued silence. "Mom, seriously, what is going on?"
If you're sick, you need to tell me.
If you're just being stubborn, I let the calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk.
Not yet.
I was still Agnes Davison of Maple Street. But in my heart, I was already feeling the pull of the ocean, the promise of sea breeze. The transformation was happening internally, a quiet revolution that no one, least of all my daughter, suspected. She thought she had broken me. She had no idea she had, in fact, liberated me. The offer on my Maple Street house came sooner than I expected. A young couple, eager to start a family, fell in love with its classic charm and the quiet, tree-lined street I had cherished for so long. They weren't put off by the dated wallpaper or the kitchen that hadn't been renovated in a decade. They saw, as I once had, a place to build a life. Susan handled the negotiations, and soon we had an agreement. The closing date was set for 4 weeks' time. Suddenly, everything became very real. My offer on the little yellow cottage in Seabreeze was accepted. The gears of change were grinding inexorably forward. There was no turning back now, nor did I want to. The relief was immense, quickly followed by a surge of nervous energy. For weeks to pack up a lifetime, to say goodbye to a house that held so much of me, and to prepare for a completely new existence. I hired movers, booked a deep cleaning service for after I left, and began the final, ruthless sort of my belongings. What would fit in a 2-bedroom cottage by the sea? What did I truly need? It was liberating, in a way, to shed the accumulated weight of possessions. Each item discarded felt like a burden lifted, mirroring the emotional burden I was determined to leave behind. Sarah was my rock during this period, coming over to help me pack boxes, offering moral support, and sharing in my nervous excitement. "You're actually doing it, Agnes," she'd say, her eyes shining. "I'm so proud of you." Her belief in me was a constant source of strength. The hardest part was knowing I had to tell Clara. I couldn't just disappear, as tempting as that sometimes felt. Monica advised me to inform her once the sale was unconditional and the moving date was firm. That time had now arrived. I rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times, trying to find the right words, the right tone. Calm, firm, unapologetic. This wasn't a discussion, it was an announcement. I decided to do it in person. A phone call felt too cowardly, an email too impersonal. This needed to be face-to-face. I invited her for lunch at a neutral downtown restaurant, a place with no emotional history for either of us. She accepted, her voice wary, tinged with suspicion. "Is everything all right, Mom?" she'd asked. "We'll talk at lunch, dear," I replied, keeping my tone even. When I saw her walk into the restaurant, I felt a pang. She was my daughter, after all. But then I saw the familiar look of impatience as she scanned the room for me, the slight frown that seemed permanently etched on her face these days, and my resolve hardened. We exchanged strained pleasantries. She asked, with a hint of accusation, why I hadn't been returning her calls. I sidestepped the question. Then, after the waiter had taken our orders, I took a deep breath. "Clara," I began, my voice remarkably steady. "I have some news. I've sold the house on Maple Street." Her fork clattered onto her plate. Her face, a moment before composed and slightly aloof, went slack with astonishment, then quickly contorted into a mask of disbelief and dawning anger. "You what? You sold the house?" Without telling me? Without even discussing it with me? There is nothing to discuss, Clara, I said calmly. It's my house. I decided to sell it, but that's our family home. That's where I grew up. That was supposed to be mine eventually. The entitlement in her voice was staggering, but I was prepared for it. Supposed to be yours? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. According to whom? It was Arthur's and my home, and then it was my home. A home, I might add, where I was recently informed I was nothing more than a burden. Her face flushed a dark, mottled red. I didn't mean it like that, Mom. You're twisting my words. I was stressed. You were honest, Clara. I cut in, my voice still quiet but unyielding. And your honesty was clarifying. It made me realize I needed to make some changes for my own well-being. Changes? Selling the house and not even telling me? Where are you going to go? Are you moving in with Sarah? What about your things? My things from childhood. The questions tumbled out, a torrent of panic and outrage. I've bought a small cottage by the sea, I said, savoring the words. In a town called Seabreeze. I move in 3 weeks. The movers are booked. She stared at me, speechless for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then, the full force of her fury erupted. By the sea? Are you out of your mind? An old woman like you. Living alone by the sea? What if something happens? Who's going to look after you? I've been looking after myself for quite some time, Clara, I replied, a hint of steel in my voice now. And I dare say I'll manage perfectly well. Perhaps even better, without the constant feeling that I'm an inconvenience. The accusation hung in the air. Her eyes narrowed. This is about what I said, isn't it? This is you trying to punish me. This is about me choosing to live my life with dignity and peace, Clara. I corrected her. Something I realized I wouldn't find if I stayed on Maple Street, waiting for you and Mark to decide what to do with the burden. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes then. Was it guilt? Regret? Or just the dawning realization that she had profoundly miscalculated? That the meek, accommodating mother she had taken for granted was capable of such decisive, independent action? The food arrived, but neither of us had any appetite. The battle lines had been drawn, not by me, but by her careless cruelty. And I, the supposed burden, was now dictating the terms of my own life. It was a strange, unsettling, yet deeply empowering feeling. Clara's initial shock quickly morphed into a desperate, flustered attempt to regain control of a situation that had irrevocably slipped from her grasp. But Mom, the memories. Dad, he loved that house. How could you just sell it, like it meant nothing? Her voice was laced with a theatrical tremor, a manipulative appeal to sentiment that, just a few months ago, might have worked. Now it fell flat. Arthur's memories are in my heart, Clara, not in the bricks and mortar. I responded, my composure unshaken. And he would want me to be happy and secure. He certainly wouldn't want me to live in a place where I felt devalued and, as you so eloquently put it, like a burden. She flinched at the word, then pressed on, her arguments becoming increasingly frantic. What about your doctors? Your routine? Seabreeze is hours away. It's completely impractical. And Mark and I, we were always planning to help you more eventually. We just needed to get through this busy phase at work. Her excuses sounded hollow even to my own ears. I could only imagine how unconvincing they were to her. Eventually is a rather vague timeline, Clara, I said, taking a sip of water. And I've decided my well-being can't wait for. Eventually, I've already found new doctors in Seabreeze, and I'm quite looking forward to establishing a new routine. One that involves morning walks on the beach. Perhaps I allowed myself a small, genuine smile at the thought. It was like watching a chess player who had just realized they were in checkmate. Her face cycled through a range of emotions: anger, frustration, a dawning panic, and perhaps, just perhaps, a sliver of genuine regret, though it was hard to tell if it was regret for her words or regret for losing control of the narrative and the asset she'd considered hers. But what about us? She finally stammered, her voice smaller now. What about our relationship? That question, I admit, gave me pause. It was the one string she could still tug that resonated with some vestige of maternal instinct. But even that was frayed. Our relationship, Clara, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, is something you redefined when you told me I was a burden. This move, this decision is a consequence of that. Perhaps, with distance, we might find a new way to connect. Or perhaps not. But I can no longer base my life choices on your approval or your convenience. She looked down at her untouched plate, her shoulders slumped. The fight seemed to go out of her. Was this remorse? Or simply the sullen acceptance of defeat?
It was hard to say.
The rest of the lunch was a strained, awkward affair. She made a few more half-hearted attempts to change my mind, to guilt-trip me, but my resolve was firm, buttressed by Monica's legal assurances and Sarah's unwavering support. And most importantly, by my own deep-seated conviction that this was the right thing to do for me. When we parted ways outside the restaurant, there was no hug, no kiss on the cheek. Just a stiff, uncomfortable silence. I'll call you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You know where to find me for the next 3 weeks, I replied, not unkindly, but without inviting further debate. As I watched her walk away, her usually confident stride noticeably less certain, I didn't feel triumph, not exactly. There was a lingering sadness for what was lost, for the mother-daughter relationship I had always dreamed of. But overpowering that sadness was a profound sense of relief, of liberation. The weight of her expectations, her judgments, her casual cruelty had been lifted. I walked back to my car with a lighter step than I'd had in years. The following 3 weeks were a flurry of activity. The movers came and went, carefully packing my chosen belongings. I walked through the empty rooms of the Maple Street house one last time, a strange mix of nostalgia and detachment washing over me. It was no longer my home. My home was waiting for me by the sea. Clara did call a few times. Her tone was subdued, almost pleading. She offered to help with the move, an offer I politely declined. I knew it was too little, too late, and likely driven by a desperate attempt to reassert some influence rather than genuine concern. The day I handed over the keys to the new owners, I felt a sense of closure. One chapter of my life was well and truly over. As I drove away from Maple Street, I didn't look back. My gaze was fixed firmly on the road ahead, towards Seabreeze, towards my new beginning. The drive itself felt symbolic, each mile putting more distance between my past and my future. When I finally pulled up to the little yellow cottage, Tom, the local agent, was there with the keys and a welcoming smile. The late afternoon sun glinted off the ocean, and the sound of the waves was a soothing symphony. My new life had begun. That first night, surrounded by boxes but with my favorite armchair positioned to face the sea, I felt a peace I hadn't known since Arthur was alive. It was the peace of a battle hard won, the peace of reclaiming one's own soul. The transition to life in Seabreeze was smoother than I could have ever dreamed. The little yellow cottage, though modest, quickly felt like home in a way the Maple Street house hadn't for a very long time. Perhaps it was the sea air, or the constant, soothing rhythm of the waves, or simply the profound relief of being master of my own domain, unburdened by unspoken resentments or the weight of others' expectations. I spent the first few weeks unpacking, of course, arranging my familiar things in new spaces. It was a joy to decide where Arthur's favorite books would go, where my small collection of teacups would sit, which window would best frame the antique writing desk I'd inherited from my own mother. Each decision was mine alone, made for my own comfort and pleasure. The locals in Seabreeze were friendly and welcoming, a refreshing change from the increasingly insular world I'd inhabited. The owner of the small bakery down the street, Mrs. Peterson, a woman with flour-dusted apron and a warm smile, soon learned my preference for her whole wheat sourdough. Mr. Henderson, who ran the tiny hardware store, no relation to my old Maple Street neighbor, though the coincidence made me smile, always had a cheerful greeting and sound advice on everything from rust-proof paint for my porch railings to the best bait for fishing off the local pier. Not that I planned to take up fishing, but it was nice to know. I established new routines. Morning walks along the beach became a non-negotiable part of my day. Sometimes I'd collect shells, Other times I'd just walk, breathing in the crisp, salty air, feeling the sun on my face. I joined a watercolor class at the local community center, something I'd always wanted to do, but never found the time for. My initial attempts were clumsy, but the process was meditative, and my fellow students, mostly retirees like myself, were encouraging and full of interesting stories. Sarah drove down to visit regularly, and we'd sit on my porch, drinking tea and watching the waves, talking for hours. She marveled at the change in me. "You look 10 years younger, Agnes," she said one afternoon. "There's a sparkle in your eyes I haven't seen in ages," and it was true. I felt lighter, happier, more vibrant. The constant ache in my hips seemed to lessen, perhaps due to the regular walks, or perhaps because the emotional stress that had exacerbated it was gone. I even started tending to the small garden behind the cottage, planting herbs and bright, cheerful flowers that thrived in the coastal air. As for Clara, well, our communication was sparse. She called occasionally, her tone a strange mix of forced cheerfulness and underlying resentment. She'd ask superficial questions about my new life, clearly finding it hard to believe I was genuinely content. "Are you sure you're okay out there, Mom? All alone?" she'd ask, the implication clear. "Are you ready to admit you made a mistake and come back to where you belong, under my supervision?" "I'm more than okay, Clara," I'd reply, my voice calm and confident. "I'm thriving." I think she struggled to comprehend that her pronouncement of me as a burden hadn't crushed me, but had instead propelled me into a happier existence. It was the ultimate, unintentional act of reverse psychology. She never apologized for her words, not directly. There were a few vague references to things being stressful back then, but no outright admission of wrongdoing, no true expression of remorse. And I didn't push for it. What would be the point? An apology extracted under duress is no apology at all. I learned that her and Mark's financial situation wasn't quite as rosy as they portrayed. Without the prospect of inheriting the Maple Street house, or the occasional financial top-ups I used to provide, they were feeling the pinch. Sarah had heard through the grapevine that they'd had to postpone a planned lavish kitchen renovation. There was a certain poetic justice in that, I suppose, though I took no real pleasure in their difficulties. My focus was on my own peace, my own contentment. I revised my will with Monica's help. A portion went to Sarah, in gratitude for her unwavering friendship. Another significant portion was earmarked for a local animal shelter I'd become fond of in Seabreeze. And yes, I left something for Clara, not the lion's share she might have once expected, but enough to show that, despite everything, she was still my daughter. But it came with a stipulation that she attend a series of grief and family counseling sessions, a suggestion from Monica, to perhaps understand the impact of her actions. Whether she'd ever fulfill that, I didn't know. My new life was full. I made friends, pursued hobbies, and reconnected with a sense of self I thought I had lost. The little yellow cottage wasn't just a house. It was a testament to my resilience, a sanctuary I had built for myself out of the ashes of a painful betrayal. The ocean was my constant companion, its vastness a reminder that life is ever-changing, full of ebbs and flows, and that even after the most devastating storms, there can be calm and beauty and peace. I had not just sold a house. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my happiness. And that, I realized, was the sweetest vindication of all. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it resonates with some of you who might have faced similar challenges. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to make a drastic change to find your peace. And please, if you enjoyed this, hit that subscribe button for more stories.